Hello and welcome. I'm Rafael Bernal, reporter for The Hill. Thank you for joining us for our 5th annual Latina Leaders Summit. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Telemundo, for their support of today's event. Latina women are integral members of American political, economic, and cultural life. Yet, significant biases and structural barriers persist, holding back true progress for Latinas across the nations. How can we address the lack of Latina representation among our institutions to better reflect the diversity of the American population? What should be done to create pathways to opportunity and growth? What strategies are needed to hardwire equity and inclusivity for Latina women and provide the resources they need to succeed? Over the next 2 hours, we will hear from Latina leaders from all walks of life for a discussion on empowerment and progress and how we can continue to build on Latina leadership across the U.S. I'm especially happy to be joined by Lex Juarez. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
So excited to have you. She is the Washington correspondent for DC News Now, our sister station, to help lead some of these conversations. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillLatina. We are broadcasting live and will be taking your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. Refreshing the page should, in most cases, fix the problem. So now let's dive in. My first guest is Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis of New York. Sworn in last year, she is currently the only Republican member representing New York City in Congress. Prior to this, she served 5 terms in the New York State Assembly. Welcome, Congresswoman.
They bring me on because I'm going to have to...
Yeah, so it's the second time you've been on this Latina Leaders event. I remember I had the opportunity to interview you a few years ago when you were running for Congress. So you are currently the only Republican representing New York City in Congress. You know, what challenges and opportunities has that presented for you? Congresswoman? I think she might be having a little trouble hearing us, but yeah, as I was saying, Congresswoman Maliotakis was on stage, I believe it was 3 years ago at the Latina Leader Summit. It was a fantastic conversation. 2 Democratic delegates from Virginia and one delegate from New York. It was it was a very political conversation.
Oh yeah, I can imagine, and
Yeah, I don't hear or
being
see
able
them,
to, you know, talk to her and hear about her experiences, to see how that's not only shaped her, but how she's working to get those experiences and shaping other people who, you know, can't quite relate on a personal level, but can, you know, do action for the people that they represent who are also Latina and Latino.
Yeah, so we're going to go, while we get the Congresswoman back on, we are going to go to our next guest. And this is a wonderful interview with Adasa. She's a bilingual Afro-Latino voice actress, singer, and songwriter. And get ready, she plays Dolores in Disney's Encanto. So I spoke with her a short while ago. This is pre-tape. Take a listen. She's wonderful. So Adasa, I want to start, I mean, this is not going to surprise you, but with Encanto. It seems everybody who has access to it is watching it. And people who don't have access to it are trying to find ways to get access to it. Why do you think this, you know, this story, this magical realism tale set in Colombia is sort of touching such a point with so many audiences worldwide?
I think that each one of us has a vulnerable side and we try to hide it. We try to cover it up. We try to ignore it, like the Uncle Bruno, you know, that was just, let's put a pin on that and let's not talk about it. And it really airs out a lot of the situations that we have in our own families and within ourselves where we feel we're not good enough or we feel that we're weak. And even though we try to hide those, we cannot fake it, but understand that they're there. And so this is a real story of a family. And if you notice, there's not a real villain either. It's just misunderstandings that happens on a daily basis. You know, the secrets that keep us from really forging those unified relationships. And so I think that people gravitated towards it because they could see a little bit of themselves in each one of those characters. Some of us feel like the Luisa with all of the weight of the world on our shoulders. Some others felt like Mirabel. I don't know what my gift is. I don't know what my part is in this family, but I'm going to figure it out and let's move forward. Some of us feel like, oh my goodness, everything needs to be perfect, and it's not perfect. Just like, you know, the mom of Antonio. So I think that the fact that it is a real story and it is also a blended family where you see the tío living there, the grandma living there, the mom, and we're all different shades, different colors. So it really embraces everything that makes us who we are. And it's not just geared towards, oh, if you're just Colombian, it's everybody. They can feel themselves represented in this film.
Right, it's just a human activity, like a human story, and I hear you had a very human story of your own in getting the part of it. I think you have a bit of an anecdote with that.
Oh my goodness, it was amazing for me. I had been doing music for 25 years. I've worked with the biggest people in the industry, from Pitbull to Daddy Yankee to Sierra, Missy Elliott, Snoop Dogg. And I took a step back because I wanted, to have more kids. And my family grew. We went from having 2 kids to having 7. And I gave birth to 6 of them. So only one, I'm his Latin mama. So we have our own blended family. And when I got a call from Disney asking me to audition, which I really thought it was a joke. At first, it was an email saying, "Hi, we would like to see if would audition for it." I thought it was like, yeah, whatever. And then my husband answers, and he's like, "Yeah, it's Disney." And we did the audition. And during the process, I was feeling a little down. So I thought I was pregnant again. I was like, oh boy, here comes number 8, because I was feeling a little queasy. And after the audition, where I gave my all to the moment, and honestly, I went in there thinking of my family. I thought, my father struggled so much to get into the United States, to give us the opportunity that I'm sitting here having right now. They need to hear his story. They need to hear the name Ernesto Diaz and Gladys Diaz. And my father, he started working, he was 9 years old. So after I portrayed all my family's history and how I'm really the product of 2 people who never gave up, that really struggled through the impossible to gain the advantages that I now have. Just like Abuela. Abuela had to leave what she knew and come to a place that she's never been, and then try to make it, and survive with these kids. My father did the same for me and for my siblings and for my mother. And so I did that. I exposed, I sang my song. And then the next day I told my husband, you know what? I'm really not feeling so great. So I'm going to go to the ER. You stay with the kids. I'll be fine. I'll be back by lunch. And what I thought would be back by lunch turned into, as soon as I drove to the hospital and they started trying to figure out what my symptoms were, I started slurring my words. I wasn't able to move, and to the point that I was paralyzed from the neck down. And it was just crippling to feel powerless. I mustered enough strength to have Siri call my husband. And then, I was trying to speak to him, and he's like, "What's going on?" And he raced. And after hours and hours of MRI tests, CT scans, and everything, I had COVID back in January of 2021. They told me, there's so many unknowns with COVID. We can't pinpoint where it's coming from, but a lot of people are having this long haul COVID, and it reflects differently on everyone. And I was wheeled out in a wheelchair after that. I went to a Vanderbilt here in Nashville for a second opinion. Same thing, spent 14 hours, all doctors, MRIs again, CT scans, blood work, everything under the sun. And went home with the same diagnosis. So I thought I was going home to die. And in those weeks where I was just literally waiting for death and having moments where I would be paralyzed, and my husband would have to take me out of the shower completely naked and place me on the bed, and we'd wait for hours to see if I could move a toe and regain the function to be able to operate. I get a call from Jamie Sparrow Roberts congratulating me on the magnificent role. And my husband was like, "We got to tell them you can't take this. We don't know if you're going to be here in 3 weeks." And I told him, "You call him if I'm dead. I'm taking this." And that was that.
So, I mean, that obviously that's sort of not sort of, exactly an emotional roller coaster. In the end, like, you obviously did take the role, you did it. What do you think you would have missed out on, in sort of as and really from the perspective of an Afro-Latina in the story that has worldwide appeal but is centered so culturally in Colombia? What would you have missed out on from that perspective if you hadn't taken the role because of COVID?
Well, for starters, I think that it gave me a driving force, because I needed to show not just myself that I had the endurance, but also prove to my kids that miracles can happen. I feel it was a miracle that I was ready 3 weeks later, from not being able to speak to then being in front of Lin-Manuel Miranda singing "We Don't Talk About Bruno" and doing a rap that takes a lot of skill to be able to deliver. That's so, you know what I mean? From when I auditioned with just, Satisfied. So this is what it feels like to match with someone at your level. What the hell is a catch? It's the feeling of freedom of seeing the light. It's been pregnant with a key and a kite. You see it, right? To what turned into "Go to live in fear upon the stuttering or stumbling. I can always hear him sort of muttering and mumbling. I associate him with the sound of falling sand. to be able to do that after weeks of not being able to talk to my kids, but in whispers, it was a miracle. So I think it carried on to the story of we do impossible things and you can rebuild from the ashes, just like in the story where the whole house falls down and the grandma's like seeing her worst fear come to life and a reality, but to face that with the family environment that you have, with the loved ones around you, you can overcome anything. And as an Afro Latina, this was the first time in history that there would be a principal role. I mean, I know it's an animated feature, but what Dolores represents goes beyond just being, this cute girl that gives information. She is an emblem for all Latinos to feel like we can do great things. Look at us there. We are arrived. Disney sees that there is a need for us to feel represented and counted. There is millions, like over 5 million Afro-Latino Colombianos just in Colombia. But even within our own cultures, if you're Dominican or if you're Puerto Rican or you're from anywhere, Venezuela, there are dark-skinned Latinos and there's light-skinned Latinos. And sometimes it becomes unbalanced to think, oh, they only come in one shade. And this film portrays the family as what it is. In one family, you'll have a light-skinned kid and you'll have another one with blue eyes and curly hair. And it's like, yeah, they're from the same mom and dad, and that is real. And so what would I have done if I wouldn't have had this film? I'm glad I didn't have to find out, because I think it would have been really sad to not be part of something so great and impactful that is really creating a ripple effect throughout the world for other creators to feel like they can do something great, that they should also invest in us because there is a need, there is a desire, there's a want to see more of ourselves represented. And so I really feel that because this age of diversity and inclusion has really come about, it gives us all an opportunity to be able to portray our gifts. I think there has been a notion of maybe there isn't a need for us, or there won't be an opportunity for us to showcase our gifts. And now it's giving Afro-Latinos and all Latinos to say, no, get ready. You better be ready because your opportunity is just around the corner.
When I was looking at your story, sort of researching where you came from, I was thinking about all the waves of Latin music that we, I'm old enough to remember the Menudo wave, but that might not be the most exciting one right now. But but then there was this sort of Latin pop in the early 2000s. I remember reading articles like the Latin wave is over, something else is going to come up, and then like reggaeton came, and people love it. Some people might not love it, but it was a complete revolution. Oh. And I'm thinking, when you're part of this revolution, when you're breaking ground on reggaeton, at any point, are you thinking like, this is my path to becoming a Disney princess?
Never. I actually had the dream of doing something with Disney since I was a little girl. And when I saw The Little Mermaid's Part of That World, when I heard Jodie Benson sing that song, I was like, I want to be part of that world. So my biggest dream when I was a kid was, I want to be an extra at Disney. I was like not even dreaming of ever being like in the princess family or royalty or any of this that has happened now. But I was just like, I want to be part of it. And when I did reggaeton, I was the second Afro female to ever be signed to a major record deal. And coincidentally, the one who believed in me was Walter Pon, which is Maluma's manager. So life has gone full circle to where I was signed with Universal Latina with a group of amazing visionaries that believed in me. Because after Celia Cruz, there had never been until they signed me, another Afro-Latina. And then I was like, hey, and by the way, I want to do it in bilingual because I was born here in the United States. I'm 100% Colombian by blood, but I'm an American. And they were like, well, stand beside you. And it wasn't easy to be the princesa of reggaeton. I mean, everybody that was in reggaeton at that time they were Boricua, they were Puerto Rican, they were light skinned. And then I come in here and I'm like, hey, we're going to do this because this is my music too. So I had to face a lot of opposition. I had to break through a lot of barriers. I had to fight in my way to be able to earn my place. But at the same time, it gave me the courage to show that these things are possible, that I had people who did believe in me. And so now Disney is also showing me this is another realm of possibilities. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the incredible creator that he is, to not just write these pieces of music, but to invest his heart and say, I'm going to put it all on the line. I'm going to do this. And I believe in our people. I believe in these stories can be told by Latinos and mixed array of them. That is the thing that I'm so excited about. But was it easy? No. But anything worth doing is never going to be easy. Anything worth doing. So if you're expecting extraordinary results with ordinary efforts, I can tell you right now, it's not going to happen. You got to be willing to put in the work and then to always be ready. Because even though I had retired 8 years ago and I was baking bread with my kids and being a stay-at-home mom and just working on film and TV music, when this opportunity came, I jumped up and I said, yes, I'm in. And I was ready.
I would love to keep chatting pretty much forever. This is great, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. This has been an amazing opportunity. And I really hope that everybody out there takes away that this is a story that is real, that it really comes from a place of love and affection. And this is a story that is meant to unite a family, for us to have the conversations that we sometimes don't spend the time we're having or maybe are afraid to have. Because sometimes parents are afraid to admit, yeah, I had a crappy job, or I had to share a room with 6 other siblings when I was younger, but this took me to where I am today. And it is such an entertaining film because a 2-year-old can laugh and then you can cry with your grandma, And it has that beauty for it. And I think that for all Latinos that are watching, this is the time in which your opportunities will come even more than ever. So become prepared and believe in your gifts, because the first person that has to believe in you is you, for you able to achieve the enduring journey that it is to be able to have an opportunity. It's not going to come easy. And when you get it, then you need to be ready and prepared for the journey ahead.
I think that's a perfect message for this summit. Thank you, Adasa.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now it's time for the sponsored perspective session of the program. Please welcome Georgianne Ocasio, Senior Director of Corporate and External Affairs of NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises, and Cristina Londoño, Senior Washington Correspondent for Noticias Telemundo. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cristina Londoño, Senior Washington, D.C. Correspondent for Noticias Telemundo. I'm so happy to be with you today at the Hill Latina Leaders Summit, and to welcome Georgianne Ocasio, Senior Director of Corporate and External Affairs at NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises. Georgianne.
Thank you, Christina, so much. It's a privilege to be here at the Latina Leaders Summit. We know that the conversations we're going to be having here today are so critical to raise awareness about the roles that Latinas play at home, in their communities, and in society. Telemundo has been a long-time supporter and proud supporter of this event, and we think it's more important than ever to shine a light, promote, and highlight the stories of those Latinas that are pushing their communities and society forward.
You're right, Georgianne, and today we have the honor of talking about the findings of a new pulse survey conducted this past month, and to learn about the state of our Latina community and what's on their mind. So let's dive right in. What are some of the main issues concerning Latinas right now?
Well, that's right. With the world changing so much, so much uncertainty on so many levels, we always think it's important to check in with our community and see how they're feeling at certain points in time and what's on their mind. Right now, not surprisingly, around 69% of Latinas are concerned with inflation and being able to meet ends meet with, covering basic needs such as education, rent, and food. Another big concern for many Latinas, about a third are concerned about gun violence and about being in unsafe communities, and about another quarter are concerned with the rising cost of healthcare. So again, another topic that is touching their pockets.
So breaking it down a little bit, let's talk about the inflation. They are concerned about inflation. Everything is a lot more expensive. We're making the same amount of money. So how are Latinas feeling about the economy in general?
Well, time and time again, we see that Latinas, despite the challenges that they may face, we're still an optimistic group, and this time was not the exception. We still see a third of Latinas feel optimistic about the general outlook of the economy, and a vast majority of them feeling confident in their ability to secure a job within the next 6 months. So that's the good news, right? And we still see that of the Latinas that are working, they're not satisfied. They want more. And that's something that really jumped out in this last survey. 81% of the Latinas that are working say that they're not satisfied with the pace of growth of their careers. Another 72% are asking for more opportunities for themselves and for the Latinas around them.
Well, this is clearly a community that wants to get better, wants to move ahead, and is not satisfied with the status quo. What do those statistics tell you? How do you analyze them?
Well, we see this as a clear opportunity for companies to invest in Latinas, to invest in those programs that can help them advance their careers. Those mentorship, sponsorship, continued education programs that can give them the jump they need to accelerate and reach decision-making positions. So we find that if you're able to offer and invest strategically and authentically in any of these programs, Latinas will see this as a signal of caring for them. And that's what they're looking for in companies and brands in general.
So at Telemundo, what initiatives do we have to meet these needs of Latinas?
Well, I'll start off by saying that at Telemundo, we're proud to say that 64% of executive positions are held by women. And within the Noticias Telemundo family, Cristina, I know you'll find this of interest and close to heart, 100% of the executive team are women. And I think we're the only national news network that can say that. And that makes us very proud. But of course, this isn't magic. It doesn't happen overnight. We've been working on this consciously for a long time. First of all, we have our program Mujeres Imparables, which is our corporate social responsibility dedicated to advancing the topic of Latinas and elevating their stories, offering them resources, statistics to highlight and make them feel confident in their ability and what they can contribute to our society. We help them be seen and be heard, and that's the big part of it. Aside from that, internally, through our human resources department, we invest a lot in the training and the mentorship that can give Latinas the exposure they need to grow here in the company. We have a program with the University of Miami School of Business. It's called the Unstoppable Women Leadership Course. There we allow our employees to have courses on negotiation, personal branding, conflict resolution, having those difficult conversations that you need to have sometimes, how to manage the relationship with your manager. So all of this contributes, of course, to giving the Latinas within our company the opportunity to grow. Besides that, we have our employee resource groups, the Women's Network, which also gives people an opportunity to see other female executives around them and learn and show them the ropes, how to make the way up. So all of this comes together and allows us to contribute to those big numbers.
Well, I can tell you this as a Latina journalist with 30 years of experience, I have witnessed those changes. I have seen the women grow, and I love having all these jefas around me now. Was there anything else that stood out to you from the survey? Yes, the fact that Latinas like to support Latinas. About 64% of Latinas want to see more of us represented in the media, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera, creating the content that they see. And of course, given the business that we're in, that's music to our ears. And I think that's crucial, that we're helping each other on the way up instead of competing. Speaking of that exactly, I believe today marks an important milestone that we're all really looking forward to. That's right. Today marks exactly 1 year out to the FIFA Women's World Cup, which will be celebrating next year in New Zealand and Australia. And it's all about soccer around here these days, because as you know, before that, we have the Men's World Cup, which kicks off in Qatar this November. But of course, Latinas are still a part of this conversation because, you know, we're everywhere. And we see that Latina fandom in this sport has grown exponentially in the United States. We see how Latinas use this to bring their families together and making it a watching event with friends and family. And of course, we're going to have more information on this and other statistics related to Latino fandom in another study that's coming out later this summer. So watch out for that. And also we have to point out that the U.S. Women's soccer team is now going to be paid as much as the men. So Latinas and all women around the country are a lot more enthusiastic about these World Cups, both the men's and the women's. We're looking forward to this. Thank you for being here at the Hill Latina Leaders Summit. And Georgiana Ocasio, it's been a pleasure sharing the space with you.
Thank you so much, Christina. And please follow Mujeres Imparables on all the platforms that you'll see here on screen.
Que nada te detenga, mujeres imparables.
All right, well, joining me now is Esperanza Teasdale, the Vice President and General Manager of the Multicultural Business Unit for PepsiCo Beverages. She's responsible for the overall strategy, engagement, and sales for a $2 billion plus Hispanic business portfolio in North America. Esperanza, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Hi.
Yeah, well, you've worked in the corporate world for over 20 years. Can you tell us about your journey and specifically how you overcame any struggles that you faced and how you think that's paved the way for any young Latinas who want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so listen, I'm first generation born in the U.S. My mom was Ecuadorian, my dad was Colombian. And, they came here for all of the reasons that most people do, to have a better life and to, open up doors for myself. So a lot of how I carry myself is based on them, right? Resilience, perseverance, passion that they had to really go for living a better life. And, I saw my parents work really hard. I saw them work long hours, factory jobs. There was no Zoom meetings or work from home. I mean, right, back in that day. And so, it was all around education and enabling me to get one. And so I did. So I was able to get an engineering degree, then I got an MBA and first to work in corporate America. And so I feel that it's important, leveraging everything that they helped build into me and then passing that forward, paying it forward, paving the way for other people to be able to deliver on what their dreams and passions are too. So I spend a lot of my time there because I just feel it's really important to help open doors for others.
Right, and in that time, not only have you worked hard and done all this, 2022 Female Frontier Award winner, 2021 25 Most Powerful Women list for people in Espanol. I mean, you're being recognized for these things, and you play an important role with PepsiCo as the head of that multicultural business unit. What are the biggest impacts that you want to make in the Latino and Hispanic communities, and how do you handle the pressure that you put on yourself to make, your expectations happen?
Yeah, I would say I embrace the idea of servant leadership, which is a type of leadership that one of our old CEOs had. And that really means that you're in there to serve others first, everything you do. And so that's how I feel about the current job I have, where not only can I influence strategy for big brands like Pepsi or Rockstar or Gatorade to help us on the business side, but I can also help influence how retailers understand the Hispanic population and business opportunity and how important we are to the fabric of the United States and to economic power, et cetera. And then I can also influence how we impact the community, how we impact small business owners. We recently launched, September of last year, actually, a platform called Juntos Crecemos, which was a commitment that our CEO made to Hispanic small businesses. And, we're seeing it every day on how the owners who are part of our program are benefiting. Their businesses are growing. We're helping them transform. We're helping them be ready for the future with digital and delivery technology. So from the seat I'm in, my goal really is to serve the consumer and our customers and the community as best as I can, and to just help elevate them so that their voice is heard and it's as authentic and positive as possible.
And we do have some audience members who are tuning in and wanting to hear specifically from you. We've got one right here on standby, Bianca Lugo, and she has a question that she wants to ask you. Go ahead, Bianca.
Hi, my name is Bianca Lugo Lewis. I am Press Secretary and Digital Media Director at the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. I wanted to ask my fellow Latinas, what is the biggest challenge you have faced in the workplace, and how has it affected you for professional advancement?
Yeah, I would answer that by folks making judgments about my potential and almost like setting the narrative for what I could or couldn't do, and that's really tough to overcome, especially when it happens at more senior levels. But what I found is that as you create a network and relationships that are authentic with other people. As you start to build your own board of directors, I'm going to call it, right, of people that you trust and people who really care about you and your growth, they then help provide opportunities, provide a seat at the table, provide access to maybe other resources and other senior executives to then start providing for then helping you create a better narrative for yourself. That's probably been the biggest challenge, is changing the narrative, or what I'll call burning the old tapes that people may have had about you. It's absolutely in your control to do that, and I would say never let anyone write that script for you.
Right. So in doing that, throughout your career and overcoming those challenges, and looking to the future, do you think that the corporate world is heading in the right direction, that you've seen changes that make you encouraged for what the future generations have in store for them?
Yeah, there's definitely progress being made. I think when companies make commitments like PepsiCo to have a certain percent of our executives be Hispanic leaders, et cetera, when we have programs for driving retention, it really helps to demonstrate the commitment we have. There's so much more runway though, right? Like Latinas still getting paid, 50 cents on the dollar, still not at the highest levels of leadership. Very few are on boards and CEOs, et cetera. So there's still so much runway to do, but I think as for each Latina who's out there, it's on us to elevate and lift up each other to help us create more momentum and make ourselves more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. And here, Rafael, I think he's got a question for you as well. So we're going to let him ask you one before we have to let you go today.
So broadly speaking, I want to know, what are the challenges you see for Latinas who are coming in today to the corporate world? Have things changed in the last 30 years?
I think the opportunities are, for them to feel like, yes, you can be your authentic self. But also, how do you build agile skills? Because, culturally, different people are raised in different ways, but in general, right? Like there's a sense of, we've got those parents that showed us like, hey, do exactly what I said, or the chancleta comes out, you know what I mean? Like, don't question other people, right? Like, very, respectful and in your place, spoke when you're spoken to. Like, I think it's a matter of understanding that, to build your career, you have to be able to be agile and flex, understand your natural state, and then what is your adapted state when you're in front of other people, when you're talking about, selling in an idea or whatever it is on a project team, but really finding your voice and then utilizing it. And so I think the more and more, the generations come, or the more and more successes that Latinas see, the more that you see. If you see it, you can be it, right? And so when that confidence starts to get built, it's more of a movement now. And so I think it's important for us all to, like I said before, elevate each other. And when someone maybe hasn't utilized their voice, hey, let's step in and and help them. Say, hey, well, what do you think? Do you have an opinion about this? Do you want to share your thoughts? Open it up for someone else, invite them in, because once they do, then they'll realize that, yeah, they can contribute and should be confident and should be ready to go, for what's there for their future.
Yeah, that's great. That's seems to be becoming a common trend here from people who we've been able to talk to today, just making sure that we're bringing each other in and supporting each other on this journey that we all have going. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's Esperanza Teasdale, Vice President and General Manager of Multicultural Business Unit for PepsiCo Beverages. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your day today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
My next guest is Yvette Merino, the Academy Award-winning producer of Disney's Encanto again, and the first Latina to receive the Oscar for Animated Feature. Yvette joined Walt Disney Animation Studios more than 25 years ago and has worked on animated features like Big Hero 6, Moana, and Tangled, just to name a few. Welcome, Yvette, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Encanto's been a huge success. I think I read somewhere it's approaching something like 2 billion minutes of streaming, of active streaming. That is, I can't even imagine what 2 billion minutes means. Why do you think it was this story? Why do you think people gravitate so much toward this story?
Well, I think, we've all asked that question of ourselves too, because it hit in such a big way. But, I think, a lot of times people feel seen in the film, and they feel like, and not only visually seen, because this is the first time Disney Animation has put a Latino family up in front and center. So there's that aspect, but also, the film really talks about the difficulty and complexities of living in a family, and a multi-generational family, and how, things from the past can really kind of have an impact generations later. And so I think, people are seeing themselves, they see their family members in it. And so, from what I've heard from a lot of my friends, it sparked a lot of conversations within the families. And so I think that was probably a part of it. And then, I would be amiss to not mention the music is amazing. So I think that's a big part too.
It is amazing. So one thing that's very impressive is it does have that global reach. It touches people of all cultures. But I know Colombians that have seen this movie, and they're just taken with the fact that it's authentic. How did you make sure that cultural authenticity would be there? Like, did you just have a lot of Colombian consultants on board?
Well, yes. And it was one of those things, we do heavy research at Disney Animation. And so very early on, our directors, Byron Howard and Jared Bush, along with Lin-Manuel Miranda and his father, Luis, they all went down to Colombia kind of to do that initial research. And then part of our process here is once we have, we've grown our show a little bit and we have our leaders on the show, the ones who are leading all the various artistic departments, we take another trip down there so all of them can experience that. Unfortunately, we had that trip planned for the end of March of 2020, and so we couldn't go. And so in that moment, I knew we had to shift and figure out a way to bring Colombia into our show. And really, we had been working with various people from Colombia, experts from Colombia, but it's been one of the most inspiring things was really how the entire crew embraced it and took on that responsibility of making sure that we had all the details right. And so we had, for our Colombian Cultural Trust that we formed, we had filmmakers who were born and raised in Colombia. They live here now, but they were born and raised. And so they were really our key. Juan Rendon and Natalie Osma were our key consultants that really saw every piece of our work. But we had botanists and we had anthropologists and architects and really everyone who they worked with our artists as they were creating and building this world, and then also worked with our directors and writers to make sure that we got all the details right.
How do you think your background as a Latina and in understanding multiculturalism as we sort of automatically all do as Latinos in this country, how did that play into your role in this movie?
Well, I think, me being a Latina growing up here, all of my grandparents, my mother was born in Mexico, but all of my grandparents were born in Mexico, and really kind of living in a, traditional Latino family where you have, your cousins and your family and your abuela and everyone is so close. It was an active part of our discussion in the story room and how we would talk about it and talk about experiences. I grew up in a household with 3 sisters. And so really when we were talking about the relationship between Isabela and Mirabel, we were talking about, sometimes we love each other, but there's that conflict. And that all comes from, my experience of being Latina, growing up in a Latino family, and, really being the voice, not the only voice. We had many voices in the room, but, being that voice in the room and sharing my experience.
So I understand you started as a temp at Walt Disney Animation Studios. How did you make it from temp to the Oscar stage?
I don't know. No, it was a lot of hard work. I started off as a temp, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my, as a job, as a career. Both of my parents, their dream was to send their girls to college. They didn't go to college. And so, they worked hard and they, taught me. I think I get a lot of my work ethic from my parents and how hard they work. But they really my instructions for life was go to college and get a good job. And so it was a lot of figuring things out along the way. And so when I started here at Disney Animation, I thought maybe I would stay for about 5 years to kind of see where it took me. And I just fell in love with the culture and the people here and the art that we do. And so after about 10 years, I worked in technology a little bit. And then after about 10 years, I had the opportunity to move into production. And within 6 months of kind of working, directly on the films, I had the realization of like, oh, this is really what I want to do. And so it was the first time, I was in my 30s and, in mid 30s. And the first time I was kind of like, oh, I could actually make a living doing this and enjoy it and love my job. And so, I started kind of watching and figuring out what the path is to being a producer. And it was a lot of learning on my part. It was a lot of obviously learning the role of production and understanding all of that, but it was learning who I am, how to speak up for myself, because I didn't know how to do that when I started here at Disney, and really starting to speak up on what I wanted. And once I, kind of found my voice is when things really started moving for me.
So my colleague Lex Juarez is gonna ask you a question as well.
Sure.
Hi, Yvette. This movie has spanned so many, like you said, cultures. People are, across the world have fallen in love. And I think because we talked about earlier, and when you had that other interview that we just showed, that showing that the families can look, not everybody's looks the same always. And with us Latinas, in the summertime I get really tan, and in the wintertime I'm really pale, and people don't always know maybe if you're Latina or Hispanic. And for you, Yvette, being able to put together this movie to see how it impacted people to feel, that representation, and to see that representation, and that it mattered to so many people, that it really, stuck to them. How does that make you feel, and you and the other people on your team, who I'm sure you guys have had multiple, discussions about this?
Yeah, it's humbling, and it is really one of the reasons why I fought so hard to actually work on this film. I knew, it was a film that I wish I would have had as a little girl, because I didn't always see people who look like my family or look like me on TV. And so once I was able to, kind of officially working on the project, I was thrilled. And we talked a lot about the diversity that happens within a family. And, it's not only Latino families, but it is so vast. And it was important that we represented people that looked differently and showed people, I have first cousins who are Latinas, but they have red hair and blue eyes. And it's just, but nobody questions that in our family, because we're all, we just all grew up as family. And so, it was so important for us to make sure that people felt seen, by the characters, making sure that we included the Afro-Colombians in the film, because it is a big part of Colombia and the family that make the people that make up Colombia. Colombia is such a beautiful country that has such great diversity in, their biodiversity, their music, their people. And so we wanted to make sure and worked really hard to try to show as much as we could.
So Yvette, one last question. What can we do, or what can Latinas do to make sure that success like yours, productions like these that talk to young Latinas and Latinos also, that we build upon that success, and the community keeps getting jobs like yours?
I think it's one of the biggest things that I think is we need to use our voice and find our voice and find out what you want and say it and speak it. And, we all have, I know, for us, I was raised to grow up and follow the rules and work hard, and you keep your head down and work hard and good things will happen. And it doesn't really work that way in the corporate world and entertainment. It's really, you have to work hard and you have to be able to stand behind your work, but you also have to be able to speak up and say, what you want and what you feel, kind of share your experience. We're in an amazing time in the sense that, I know, especially in entertainment, people are like curious and opening the doors and wanting, to bring more diverse stories. So this is our opportunity to really use our voices and share our experiences, because those are experiences and stories that have been left out of the room for so long. So find out, find out what you want to do and go for it, but really say it and speak it and share your stories, because they're important.
It's excellent. Yvette Merino, producer at Walt Disney Animation Studios, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Well, joining us now, we have Ramona Ortega. She's the CEO and founder of Mi Dinero, Mi Futuro, or My Money, My Future, a personal finance platform that works to help Black and Latinx millennials save, invest, and build wealth. Welcome, Ramona. So happy to be talking to you this afternoon.
Yes, excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes, so, we can jump right into it. I just, first question, can you tell us more about your background and how that led to the creation of My Money, My Future?
Absolutely. So I am, third generation Mexican-American out of California. So my mom was a farm worker, didn't necessarily have the opportunity to attend college. And when I grew up in the Napa Valley, I seen a lot of disparities and inequality amongst people in my family, in my community. And it was something that always sort of sat with me the wrong way. And I thought, we work so hard. There's so many people out here who are putting their lives on the front lines to come here to make a living for their families, and why are we not seeing the same opportunities? And so that stayed with me through undergrad. Originally, I was a journalist actually, and I came to New York to work for 60 Minutes early on, and I eventually transitioned into public policy, where I addressed some of these issues around inequality. And then eventually ended up going to law school, working on Wall Street, and being sort of inside the belly of the beast, if you will. I seen sort of what sort of other people talked about in terms of money and intergenerational wealth, and how they use the mechanisms of Wall Street and the financial markets to build that wealth. And I thought, if not me, whom to really address this issue? And that was in, really around 2016, 2017. So we've been sort of doing this work for a while now, and now we've seen this emergence of fintech, and there's a lot more opportunities out there for us to grow that intergenerational wealth.
Can you talk to me a little bit about, you said you were working on it for a while and then it really kind of got off the ground in 2017. How long were you in Wall Street before you decided, I got to do something about this?
Sure. And so I will say this, that, it started really in public policy. I was actually working in international human rights work for many years, and specifically addressing the racial wealth gap. So in 2020, I went to South Africa. In 2002, I went to South Africa as a delegate for the World Conference Against Racism. So the Wall Street piece, I was in Wall Street for about 4 years, working in securities litigation, and worked on many cases that you probably are aware of, like Bernie Madoff. And those were the sort of, that period of time was really inspirational in terms of learning about sort of how to structure finance. And so that's when I really took the leap onto entrepreneurship. And at that time, it was really the emergence of financial technology as fintech as we know it. Since 2017, when we launched the company, I think we've just seen a huge rise in that sort of fintech space and opportunities to have technology help to build the tools that we need to build wealth.
Right, and you've talked about it already, the wage gap. It's extensive across the U.S., particularly impacting women, but even more so taking a step further, Latina women. So, what do you think specifically stands in the way of closing that gap? Why is it so difficult here in the U.S. for us to get that closed and to have, fair pay for everybody?
Absolutely. So I'll say even let's go a little bit broader, right? So it's not just the wage gap; it's actually the wealth gap. The wage gap, which, as we know, for Latinas is one of the worst numbers. It's like 52 cents on the dollar, and that is a huge problem, and it's a contributor to the actual racial wealth gap, right? Which is net worth. So let me tackle the first one. The wage gap has a lot to do with sort of the opportunities in the market, sort of what are we negotiating in terms of salary? And that's a huge piece. What are we paying for a living wage in states, right? And that's the policy piece. And so those two really contribute highly to sort of the overall wealth gap. We have a massive wealth gap in this country, and Latinos are literally $100,000 away from parity to our counterparts, to our white counterparts. A lot of that has to do with the wage gap. Much of it has to do with intergenerational wealth transfer. And that has to do with investing and how we allocate those funds into different assets and building a portfolio, not only of real estate, but your 401k, your brokerage accounts. And all of that really depends on your ability to have money left over at the end of the day to invest. And I think that's really important. Another thing I would say is that we don't necessarily take advantage often of the 401ks that are available, or we're in jobs that don't provide it. And so a lot of states are taking action right now to make those portable 401ks available to people. I think the last numbers that we've seen was less than 30 or only 39% of Latino women were invested in their 401k. And so that's a huge part of also, bridging that gap on not only on the wage gap, but also on the sort of wealth gap.
Right, and so we talk about these issues that have been facing us and we do face and day to day, but right now we're also facing an economy that's headed towards recession. Do you have any financial tips, tricks, maybe a top 2 or 3 things that you think that young people especially need to be thinking about and doing as the fears surrounding the inflation and what's going on with the economy continue to rise?
Absolutely. So this is, we are in a cycle, right? And I think that the more you understand finance generally, but even personal finance, and how these macro things like a recession or inflation impact your personal finances, the more you'll be able to sort of weather the storm. So for young people, it's about starting to invest as soon as you can. As soon as you're 18, you can open an IRA. Right? So you don't even have to have a job, an employment 401k. You can start with an IRA and start investing, even if it's $50 a month. You can also start putting away money in an emergency savings account. That's really important for times like this. There's also, in terms of how long you invest, it's really important that you start early, because what you're going to be able to do is to weather the storms, and many storms will come. We've had dips in the market. This is what's called cyclical, right? These things happen. And in fact, if you're prepared and you're informed, you're able to not only plan for them, but also to take advantage of what we call those dips in the market, which we're having right now. So in terms of planning, not only for young people, it's not how much you invest, it's how long you invest. So start now. Get that information that you need. The education is out there. We just launched a large campaign to educate and activate 1 million new Black and Latino investors called Thrive. And so people can get free resources on thrivecampaign.org. And we have a financial boot camp, an investment boot camp for people to access there. So get that information that you need so that you're least sort of afraid of the markets, because sometimes because we don't understand the language or the financial jargon, we feel a lot of shame, or we feel like we're unprepared to take action. And really, inaction is one of the things that harms us the most. So we want to start taking that action early. And even if you're in your 30s and 40s, you want to start thinking about diversifying your portfolio. What are you invested in? Taking a look at that, understanding what this dip means or a recession coming in means, so that you're careful about your cash. You're putting it in places where you're going to have some safety. You're not putting too much at risk, and really understanding the different types of asset classes that are out there, including real estate and equity markets.
Right, and we talked about that wealth gap and a little bit of how it transcends across generations. For somebody who is in that mindset of, well, my grandpa was poor, my grandpa's grandpa was poor, I'm never going to be able to have that money that I wish that I had. What's your advice to them? How they get out of that mindset to then really start to think and be serious about investing in their future and getting out of that cycle that's been following their family.
Absolutely. Look, it's a cycle that I was absolutely a part of. And I think that I'll be the first generation to inherit wealth. And for many Latinos, that's going to be true. So we need to really understand, what does that look like? And how do I use that influx of capital or cash coming in when we have that transfer of wealth? One of the most important things you can do, especially even as a young family, is to get life insurance. Life insurance is a tool for building intergenerational wealth. And oftentimes families don't like to think about it because obviously no one wants to think about death. But what we need to start thinking about is legacy. So how do we build the legacy, especially in communities of color? Latino families have such a long history of legacy. We have intergenerational families living together. We have businesses, we have homes. So we need to think about, how do we protect those? Life insurance is one of the ways that we protect those things. The other is thinking about estate planning. And it's really not too early to think about it. Really, you should be thinking about it in your late 30s, early 40s, because it is how we pass down our wealth and how we start thinking about how we give, for example. One of the things that we don't often think about, even in building wealth, is sort of what's our legacy around philanthropy and political giving. If you have an association with an organization, for example, or with an educational institution. So those kinds of things are being thought about when you're doing estate planning. But also thinking about your different types of accounts. You have a 401k, you have an IRA, and more often than not nowadays, you're going to have a brokerage account. Maybe you're young enough and you're investing in some crypto, and I hope you are. I hope you're careful, and I have lots of educational resources about that. But that's, those are the things that you want to start thinking about, how to not only build those assets, but then also protect them.
Ramona Ortega, CEO and founder of Mi Dinero, Mi Futuro. Thank you so much for joining us today. Some great advice and tips that you were able to give us.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Dr. Ana Maria Nápoles, Scientific Director of the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. She is the first Latina to be named to the position at the National Institutes of Health. Welcome, Dr. Nápoles.
Thank you very much, Rafael.
Well,
I love the way you pronounce my name.
Yeah, I am a Spanish first speaker, but on that point, I wanted to get, how's your background? How was growing up as a Latina sort of feed into your decision to end up in the medical sciences and make a career in the medical sciences?
Well, my background is, and it's very similar to what some of the other women have indicated. My parents were both immigrants from Jalisco, Mexico. They were from small rural villages, and my father never went to school. My mother went to the 3rd grade. And so when they immigrated to the US, they saw education as a way out of poverty. And so for them, it was very important that me and my 2 siblings go to college. And I went on to get a graduate degree in public health and a PhD in epidemiology. And so that was very much, that career choice was influenced by my childhood. We lacked health insurance, so I had illnesses, the infectious illnesses like diphtheria and measles because I was not vaccinated. I served as the interpreter at my mother's medical visits and saw how important it was to communicate well with physicians, and they understood and could ask questions, that I could do that on behalf of my mother. So all those factors, as well as working in a women's health clinic and then seeing how cultural factors influence women's medical decision-making, healthcare decision-making, all influence my career choice.
So first of all, great shout out to Jalisco, Arriba Jalisco. But I wonder if you can go a little bit more in depth, like these cultural barriers that have prevented Latinos in the country from getting the right kind of medical care? Sort of what damage have they done, and have they improved over a certain period of time? Let's say the last 25 years.
So I tend to avoid or not use the word barrier because I think that the implicit assumption there is that culture is getting in the way, right? And in many cases, in the cultural traditions that Latinos have are what explain the Latino paradox potentially. So, and what I mean by that, so there are, when you look at the evidence, we know that immigrant Latinos in the US generally have better health profiles than US born Latinos and Latinos that have been here if they're immigrants for a longer period of time. So they begin to look more like the dominant white culture in terms of their health behaviors, increased smoking rates, increased alcohol use, more sedentary behaviors, that type of thing. So we don't know, in general, Latinos tend to live longer in the US than whites, than their white counterparts. And by white, I mean non-Latino whites. And they also generally do better in terms of the two biggest killers, which are heart disease and cancer. And so we really don't know all the factors. So there could be a lot of protective cultural factors that enhance and sustain positive health behaviors or positive social networks that we know are associated with better health outcomes. But there are disadvantages. We know that Latinos are 3 times more likely, as I mentioned, not to have health insurance. We know that generally they tend to be more well represented in hard labor occupations, service occupations, that they generally have a lower educational level, lower income, average income than whites. And all those factors can create disadvantages in terms of health outcomes.
I appreciate that idea of dropping that word barriers. I think that's, we'll do that here. We'll follow your advice. One quick question before I pass on to my colleague, Lex Juarez. In the political world, in polling, we often say that it's really hard to poll Latinos. Pollsters, like maybe they have language issues. They don't poll in Spanish and in English, or they don't reach all the communities, or the communities themselves are not as communicated. Do you see a similar difficulty when trying to do the statistical work of finding out what medical science needs to address a community's needs?
Well, what I've learned over, with about 30 years of experience working in Latino communities doing health research that's community-based is you have to go to the communities, right? So, and you have to have people on your team who speak the language, know the culture, live in the communities, and know how to access people who are Latino. And so we're not monolithic, as you know, we're very diverse. And so that means having diverse research teams and diversifying our research workforce. So I would say, if there's evidence that Latinos are not represented in a lot of health research, it's some of the factors that contribute that are that we're not using the right means, right? If we're using electronic means to do those polls, not everybody has equal access to internet or high capacity internet, right? High speed internet. And those factors can often influence where we see lower response rates in those communities. But community health workers that are from communities in terms of delivering health interventions have been very effective because they know how to work and reach those populations.
Okay, my colleague Lex has a question for you now.
Yeah, you were talking about vaccines at the very beginning and how you weren't able to get some of those. Just this past year, we went through, the COVID-19 vaccine being released, and minorities, not only Latinos and Hispanics, and all minorities being hesitant to take that vaccine, especially when it was very first coming out. To have somebody like you, in such a high position, how do you think that helps people to feel more comfortable about, trying new things that are coming out in healthcare as we continue to progress?
Well, it's interesting because we actually did some early work early in the pandemic, looking where we did a nationally representative survey, and we actually found the opposite, that it was Latinos, especially Spanish-speaking Latinos, who were more willing to be vaccinated, and their rates are actually higher or equal to whites at this point, and they're very much interested in the COVID vaccine. Yeah, and I think a lot of that is driven by the impact, the disproportionately horrible impact it's had in our Latino community in terms of, the exposure either due to their service occupations or living in homes, all those factors that increased their risk of exposure to COVID and poor outcomes and access. But definitely, I think getting the word out there, a lot of intensive efforts were made at the community level and in Spanish to increase those rates. But I think even before those activities were conducted and initiated, there was a disposition to be vaccinated because people were seeing the impact in their communities. And so,
do you find yourself taking any extra kind of responsibility or feeling that weight to be a representative for the greater Latino community, and how does that kind of manifest in what you do every day when you're headed to work?
I guess I don't see it as a weight. I see it as my calling, right? It's a service. It's what,
right, absolutely.
It's a fundamental value that, was instilled in me as a child, is we're here to serve others. We're here to give those who don't have a voice or feel disenfranchised in our society. We're here to provide that for them if we're in a position where we can do that. And we're here to give them that voice back. They can take it. They should be advocating for their communities and can advocate. And I guess that's the mentality I came in with in this occupation. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you. You have resources, you have strengths in your communities. Let's use those strengths to better the health of our people, of our comunidades.
So we've been asking a version of this question to a lot of our guests today. What can be done to build on your success and build on the success of other women, especially in science, in the medical sciences, to get future generations of Latinas who understand these cultural distinctions that can give better medical access to the whole community and to other communities?
For us at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, having these programs where we're making an intensive effort to diversify the biomedical workforce is critical. We're trying to, anyone in my position, I feel, is obligated to extend the hand to those that come behind us and create those opportunities and promote candidates that are qualified, that are diverse, and can get the job done, and can also be advocates for their communities where they come from.
Dr. Ana Maria Nápoles, Scientific Director of the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
My next guest is Congresswoman Nanette Barragan of California. She is the vice chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and she's the second Latina to ever hold a seat on the prestigious Committee on Energy and Commerce. Big deal in Congress, that one. I spoke with the Congresswoman earlier this week. Let's listen to our conversation. So Congresswoman Barragan, thank you so much for being here with us again.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with a little bit in the weeds, a little bit into the Congress weeds. You're a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the first Latina to be a member of that committee in 10 years, I think. And you're a member of the Homeland Security Committee. Not just anyone gets to have this double membership, or even the membership in Energy and Commerce. Why was that important to you? Why did you fight so hard to get these assignments?
Well, when I ran for Congress, and my work has been on environmental justice and making sure we're being a voice for our communities. And so we take a look at that amount of work on environmental justice and the connection to healthcare. Energy and Commerce is the place to be. It is the exclusive committee that does everything on the environment, everything on healthcare. And so it's the place where I thought we needed a voice, especially Latinos and Latinas, to have a voice on that committee. Because as you mentioned, it had been 10 years since the first ever Latina ever sat on that committee. So that was really important to me. And of course, we know Homeland and the border issues are prominent. And it's a tough assignment, but someone has to do it and be the voice of making sure we have humane treatment of our migrants at the southern border and at all our borders, really.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. You mentioned having a Latina in energy and commerce and these environmental issues. We know environmental issues disproportionately affect our community. Give us a little overview on why that is and what representation like yours can do to improve that situation.
Well, if you take a look at areas that have a lot of environmental injustices, that are near refineries, near ports, near freeways, they tend to be lower income communities, and they tend to be communities of color, Latino, African American, low income folks. And so what you see happening around these communities is some intimidation from nearby companies, from people against speaking out. Another times, what you see is these are people who are working 2 jobs and they're still struggling to make ends meet. And so they may not be able to do the protest or come out to do what you see in more affluent communities. And so there is a target, I believe, of lower income communities and communities of color into these areas. So making sure that we're fighting to have parity, because everybody deserves clean air and clean water, is important to me. Now, I grew up in my congressional district, which is, has the Port of Los Angeles nearby. It's surrounded by 3 freeways, and it has a lot of air pollution issues, asthma, cancer rates are up, and it's a majority Latino district. So just to give you an idea, it's been a personal issue for me, and I've seen it happen across the country. So being that voice for our community, not just in my district, but for Latinas and Latinos across the entire country, is important to me.
Now we know, whenever Latinos are polled, the environment comes up often above immigration as an issue that people care about. It's usually the economy, healthcare, education, the environment is right up there. Are these issues, particularly the environment, is it an issue that Democrats can use to excite Latino voters to go out to the polls and to vote for them?
Absolutely. Now, part of this is the messaging. And I'll be the first to tell you, when I talk about climate change, it's just as climate change. It's a very different conversation than when I talk about clean air and clean water and the health of our kids and the connection between asthma rates and the environment. It's a different conversation. And that is what Latinos and Latinas care about. And that is what they want to go out and vote for and support. But, we also need to do a better job in Congress in making sure we're able to get legislation through that's going to help these injustices. And I know the Biden administration has been focused on Justice 40, making sure there's some parity in getting money and funding into these communities. But absolutely, climate and the environment and the impact that it has on our health is a top issue amongst voters, including Latinas and Latinos who care very much about it.
Now you mentioned messaging. Is what Democrats need to get Latinos out voting Democratic, is it merely an issue of messaging, or what will it take for Democrats to really excite Latinos the way they were excited in 2018 in the midterms, for instance?
Well, you have to remember we're in a different time as well. We are in a time where you have misinformation and disinformation that's targeting Latinos. And that's a real problem that we need to combat, because, people then start to believe these lies they're being told. And so part of this new targeting is going to not only be telling Latinos what has been done, whether it's funding in COVID funding on the American Rescue Plan, whether it's, infrastructure and money going into environmental justice programs in their communities. But now you've got to combat the mis and disinformation. And that's hard to do because we know that when people hear these lies over and over again, that they start to believe it. And that's something that we in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus had a hearing with House admin down in Miami. And even that day, we heard a lot of lies and disinformation. So it's going to take a lot of work to combat that, to tell voters, what we're doing. Not only that, but to tell them what we're going to do. It's not just about telling people what we have done. It's what we're going to do. And, there's a lot going on right now, whether it's environmental issues or women's right to make decisions for their own bodies. And that's something that's at stake, not only in this election, but as we know on the court.
That's what I want to touch on, because there's, I think, a lot of predispositions, a lot of people thinking they know how Latinas feel about abortion. I have the sense that much like the community is not a monolith, Latinas aren't either. Do you sense any dividing points, whether it's national origin, generational, geographical, or economic, or social even, where Latinas have different stances on, generally speaking, on abortion and on the end of Roe v. Wade?
So the biggest divide I have seen has been generational. The more older populations you talk to, at least in my district, is where you have more of a split. The more religious areas as well tend to have a little bit more of a split. But I will say what's really interesting is even for those who may split and, take the position of, their religion says that they shouldn't support abortion. I haven't seen those voters decide to vote for the other party just based on that one. Now, we have seen that on the flip side of that, where you'll have, generational, maybe younger folks who understand the importance and, will go out and vote, and energizing them on this issue. So I think it's a misconception to just generalize and say all Latinos are for or against. There are going to be pockets, and there's always going to be people who disagree. At the end of the day, this is about freedom and a woman's right to make decisions for themselves. And sometimes as well, when you put it into perspective of their own children, their own family, they tend to have a different point of view than when it's generalized and it doesn't impact their families.
So Congress in general has had trouble legislating on big issues over the last quarter century. And I think that there's enough blame to go around on that one. So let's not stick to that. But how do you get voters that have historically been reluctant to go out to the polls, have not fully believed in these institutions? How do you convince them, this time it's for real?
Well, the first thing is we need to have that voter contact, and that's not happening, and it's not happening year round. And I think this is one of the biggest problems that we have. We basically wait for an election, and then we say, okay, 2 months before the election, we're going to start reaching out to these voters. And that's an ongoing issue. We have to engage Latinos and Latinas throughout the year round, and making sure that we're engaging with them and having contact with them, that we're talking in their language, that we're knocking on their doors. That voter contact makes a huge difference. The other big thing I've seen, Rafael, especially in my own district, is that Latinos don't vote in primaries at anywhere near the numbers they vote in general elections. And that will limit who their choice of candidates are in a general election. And so making sure we're continuing to go out to educate voters about the primary, the importance of voting in a primary is ongoing. That's something I do with a lot of the Spanish news outlets on an area we need to do work on. When I would knock on doors, to give me an example, to Latino households, they would say, yeah, I'll support you. And then they said, I'll see you in November. And I went, wait. In California, we have a primary in June. You need to vote first on this so that I will make it to the general election. And they don't understand the concept that much, or maybe they don't prioritize it. But it's making sure that we are doing voter outreach and engagement and touching them throughout the year and helping them understand the importance of primaries.
On that point, Republicans this year for House races, they're running off the top of my head. I can think of 5 Latina either challengers or going for an open seat. They very quickly developed a bench of Latinas where Democrats have been working on this, and I know you were recruited in 2016, and there's been like it's been done very much on purpose, but it's been a slower process. Why do you think it is that Republicans so quickly turned on that spigot of Latina and Latino candidates, and Democrats take longer and have those problems at addressing Latino voters year long?
Well, they want to win, and they're looking for any possible opportunity to pick up folks. And, historically, when you've taken a look at the women on the Republican side, it's been dwindling. What's really concerning and sad is some of the women that we have been seeing, Latinas coming to Congress, who have been spreading misinformation, disinformation, association with QAnon. And let's remind people that the FBI and the Homeland Security has warned about the extremism in this country related to these groups. And so to have members come in and do that is, I think, dangerous and sad. It just has bought into these lies that we've heard from the former president and his supporters. So, sometimes it's not just about electing another Latina. It's about folks who are going to stand up for our democracy, who are going to vote in the interest of our communities, and not spread misinformation and disinformation, which I think is eroding the Congress. I never imagined I would be serving in Congress with people who would be spreading misinformation, who wouldn't stand up to democracy. So I think there's a lot to look at just then saying, okay, there's a Latina in the race. When in 2016, when I ran, I was the only new Democratic Latina elected in the House. The other one was Catherine Cortez Masto in the Senate. But that's remarkable and just shows the underrepresentation that we have in Congress amongst Latinas when you take a look at the population across the country.
Okay, I want to end this on a positive note. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you, now that you have a fair amount of experience in Congress, you are among the leaders of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, possibly the next chairwoman. You tell us, what advice would you give yourself if you could talk to yourself as a candidate in 2016?
Well, number one, it's about networking, talking to people, raising money, and engaging with the voter. Those are the biggest things. And I think sometimes there's some hurdles that we come across in the fundraising side, but it's making sure to follow through with your connections and your network, not letting anybody to tell you can't do something, because you know what, Latinos are going to hear that day in and day out. And so it's using that to motivate yourself and to get out there and to prove people wrong. And that's the first thing I tell young women, especially young Latinas, is don't let anybody tell you cannot, because you can. If you think about our stories, and my story is not unique. We're the daughter of immigrants. My mom only finished the 3rd grade. And who would have ever imagined she thought that her child could become a member of the US Congress? And my story, again, isn't unique. And we're in the land of opportunity. And I'm hopeful. And so we need to continue to inspire our young women, our young Latinas to be bold, to step up, and not to let people say no when they can't, because they can.
Excellent. Congresswoman Annette Barragan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, joining us now, we've got Regina Romero, the first woman and first Latina mayor of Tucson, Arizona. Well, earlier this spring, you were named chair of the Latino Alliance for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Welcome. So glad that you're joining us here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations to The Hill for organizing the Latina Leaders Summit, as well as Telemundo for helping put this together. And I just feel honored to be included in this long list of amazing nationwide group of Latinas that are just incredible, and their stories are amazing. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, like you said, and you're joining that long list of incredible women who are making an impact. Like I just said, the first Latina mayor of Tucson. And on top of that, you're the only Latina mayor in the 50 largest cities in the United States. What kind of added pressure does that put on you, when you're making your policies and making decisions and in your leadership of the city?
Well, Lex, I'm pretty sure you are familiar with being the first on stuff, right? Many of the women that have been invited to this event today are the first. But, I have been the first in so many different spaces. I was the first Latina ever elected to the Tucson City Council back in November of 2007. I was the first in my family to attend a university and graduate from college. First in my family born in the United States. I'm the daughter of immigrant farm workers and the youngest of 6. And so I was the first one to vote, to be able to have the right to vote, born in here in Arizona. And much later, my siblings, my parents became naturalized U.S. citizens so that they could vote. And so it's something that I've not really been conscious about, but just been able to go ahead and move forward and do unconsciously. But when I became the first Latina mayor and the first woman ever in the history of the city of Tucson, I knew it was going to be the first, but I didn't know the impact that it has made, not just here in Tucson in Arizona, but around the country. When I woke up the next day after I won, and we saw Telemundo, Univision, other, TV channels and different media outlets throughout the country reporting on this, it hit me that I have a responsibility to be able to open these doors, and that the mere election of the first Latina mayor ever in the history of our city really brings a lot of responsibility of being able to bring others along with me and opening the doors for so many young Latinas and women in this country.
Right, shattering that glass ceiling and then making sure that it stays open. And you talked to us just now briefly about some of your childhood background. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that, and also how that influences your leadership over Tucson and then working with other jurisdictions on various initiatives that you guys have locally?
Yes, well, I carry with me my parents' history. And my dad always used to say, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you come from. And so the experiences of having immigrant parents and working in the fields and migrating from Arizona to California to Colorado really made me appreciate the value of hard work and dedication and having and setting goals. And so my parents always taught me to value hard work and get a good education and go after my dreams. And so being able to carry that experience with me, it has really set me up to the policy and decisions that I have been making as a council member here in the city of Tucson and as mayor. So I've never forgotten my roots and who I am and where I come from, and really dedicate myself to improving the lives of working families, just like mine. And education for me, higher education was the ticket to improve the quality of my life and the life of my family. And so I continue fighting for the issues that have made my family succeed and thrive. And so those are the issues that I dedicate my life on. And so my past really contributes to what I do now and into the future. And it is something that I feel in my heart. And so it's a passion of mine. In terms of working with colleagues here on the Tucson City Council and other mayors throughout Arizona and throughout the country, being named the chair of the Latino Alliance for the U.S. Conference of Mayors has been an important step, and I have a lot of plans to connect to other mayors throughout the country that not only are Latinos, but have growing populations of Latino communities in their cities. To work on the issues that make a difference to the lives of Latinos in this country is just incredible. I have a lot of plans for the Latino Alliance and working with the African American Mayors Associations and forming alliances to work on voting issues and making sure that public education is funded, voting rights, so many issues that cross from Latinos to African Americans to indigenous communities to including LGBTQ and rural low-income communities. A lot of these issues cross-pollinate, and it's something that we need to make sure that we're working on together. Here in Arizona during the pandemic, I worked with a lot of mayors, including our mayor of Phoenix and the mayor of Flagstaff, all of us women, to make sure that we were keeping our community safe throughout the pandemic, many times going against Arizona's governor to make sure that we were protecting our residents with the policies and decisions that made sense and were based on science.
Right, and then we see my colleague over here, he's got a question for you as well, and I'm sure going to be following up on some of those points that you just hit on as well.
Absolutely. So you are a mayor, a progressive mayor in a purple state, and that means there are very different interpretations and very different assurances for a bunch of rights, whether it's women's rights, the right to choose, voting rights, definitely immigrant rights, labor, you name the issue. Those rights are not guaranteed in one way or another for Arizonans. Do you believe that other progressive structures, the Democratic Party, other mayors around the country, are they hearing you when you defend Latinos and Latinas in your state and really point out that these rights are not guaranteed?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, even though my parents immigrated to Arizona and to this country, my family has been living in the Sonoran Desert for the past 7 generations, and that is including my kids. In the Sonoran Desert crosses both into Sonora, Mexico, and Arizona. And so we are from here. And so, seeing Arizona become the guinea pig to these conservative policies has been painful and a struggle, especially when Arizona with SB 1070, we became a national example of anti-immigrant rhetoric. And at the time, I was on the Tucson City Council, and Tucson became the first city in Arizona to join the court case, the Supreme Court case against the state of Arizona. But because of SB 1070 and the struggles that many of us first generation immigrants were facing and the concerns and fear that we faced at the time, we started organizing ourselves. And many of the young people that were marching and rallying and protesting SB 1070 really started working on organizing ourselves and creating nonprofit organizations dedicated to informing and educating Latino voters and registering people to vote and getting them out to vote. And so the face of Arizona really has changed in the past 12 years because of those anti-immigrant laws passed, Mexican American education. There was a law passed back then at that time. And so we have worked really hard to educate Latino voters and bring them out to vote, so much so that in 2020, because of Latino voters and us participating, we switched the state. And it had not happened in more than 20 years in Arizona. So we are a force to be reckoned with here in Arizona. And many of the young people that were protesting and rallying back in 2010 have run for the state house, the state senate, city councils throughout the state. And we see continued movement forward when it comes to representation of what really Arizonans want for our state.
You mentioned some of that, anti-immigrant rhetoric and some of these laws that have been passed. And here recently, here in DC, we've been covering, the migrants who are being sent by the busful from your state in Texas. What is that, what are your feelings and thoughts on that, on people being shipped away, instead of being welcomed to your state?
Yes, unfortunately, MAGA Republicans here in the state are using immigrants as a scapegoat. Instead, Arizona is the 49th state in the nation when it comes to investment in public education. We are right there with other southern states in terms of healthcare opportunities for children. We don't graduate enough students from high school to go into higher education. We have most horrendous rates of diabetes, and this plagues indigenous communities as well as Latino communities. We have so many ailments in terms of day-to-day working family needs. And what unfortunately Republicans are focusing on is, in their budget, they recently allocated more than $600 million of the state budget to finish Trump's wall. And where we have interstates that are crumbling, we have one of the worst rated public educational systems in the nation. We have one of the worst mental health and behavioral health systems in the nation. And so I believe that if we continue to talk about and fight for the real issues that affect working families in the state of Arizona, and we continue fighting for funding these issues, that at the end of the day, all of this bravado and showmanship and trying to divide Arizonans versus bringing them together is going to win the day, because most Arizonans, when we poll, they believe in comprehensive immigration reform. They believe in allowing dreamers to have in-state college tuition. They believe in having a woman, any person that is pregnant, choosing their own path in terms of having access to abortion services. So unfortunately, the MAGA Republicans that have taken over the state are not representative of what Arizonans want or need in this state.
Mayor Romero, I could probably sit here and talk with you all day long, asking you questions to hear about your point of view. I so appreciate you, coming on here and talking with us today. This is Regina Romero, Mayor of Tucson, Arizona. It's been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
We're going to turn the page and talk to our next guest. The next guest we have here is Maria Teresa Kumar. She's the founding president and CEO of Voto Latino, the country's largest Latinx voting rights organization. And under her leadership, Voto Latino has registered over 250,000 voters. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the program today.
Thanks so much for having me. I have to say that it's nice to see the Hill participating with Telemundo and Latina leaders. And I have to agree that what the mayor was saying, we double down. Voto Latino, we've actually registered over 1.2 million voters, 650,000 of them in the last year alone, and mobilized 3.7 million in key swing states. So excited to have the conversation with you today.
Yeah, so kicking it off, how does your background of, immigrating to the U.S., becoming a citizen as a child, how does that shape your passion around voting and getting people to the polls and making sure that other Latinas are also registered to vote?
So I had the privilege of coming to this country, and I often like to say that I chose this country, and it was in large part because I deeply believe that when we work hard and we are collectively thriving towards a more just union, then every single person wins. My family fled Colombia when it was unstable, and it was a drastic difference of what my life would have been like. My mother was a single mother. She is of Afro-Colombian descent, and by a lot of those trappings, my future in Colombia, had I been raised there, was already defined. And in the United States, it was an open slate. And so one of the ways we ensure equity in this country is making sure that there's participation. Oftentimes people say, well, where is the Latino vote? And then I have to gently remind them that there is a progressive movement because Latinos voted in record number in 1993 when Pete Wilson was trying to pass anti-immigrant legislation through the ballot. And Latinos organized, mobilized, and California went from being a swing state to a solidly blue state. But it was young Latinos who convinced their families to become citizens and to vote. It was young Asian Americans who did that. And at Voto Latino, we recognize the agency of young Latinos to convince their families. And so for the last 18 years, Voto Latino first started working a lot in Colorado, and then we expanded to Nevada, and we went into Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Texas, Florida. Hopefully you're seeing a pattern. And we've been in these states now for at minimum 7 years, but it's because there's a huge rise in the Latino community that happen to be young. To give you an example, in Texas, Latinos are 23% of the electoral base, 52% of the classrooms. And many of us are first generation. And so there's an eagerness and an appetite for participation among the community, especially when they're faced in states where Latinos are feeling that they are being marginalized or, sadly, increasingly targeted under racial discrimination.
Right, and it's been almost 20 years since you first launched Voto Latino. And you're talking a little bit about the importance of the Latino vote. Could you kind of maybe go into that a little bit more and specifically also mention the mistakes that politicians typically make when they are trying to appeal to these voters?
Well, I think that what makes the Latino voter so unique is the fact that so many of us are first-time voters. And so when you are going in and trying to figure out which is the political party that fits you, you kick around the tires and you want to see results. You care deeply about issues. And it's the party that resonates with those issues that you end up participating with. One of the biggest challenges, though, is that the volume, just the sheer volume of young Latinos coming of age, just between the last election and the midterm election, just in 2 years, we're going to have close to 3 million Latino youth turning 18 years old. In Texas alone, close to over 250,000. And so what politicians don't realize is that they need to speak with Latinos across generations. You have to talk about the issues that they care about. And you have to do it with respect. It's not enough to say that you're going to translate a handful of brochures and door knocking and leave it at that. No, you need to have a continuous conversation and relationship with the voter like you would with other communities. And so at Voto Latino, once we register you, we make sure that you turn out, but then we keep that conversation going. And I would also caution a lot of politicians to go against tropes. There's this idea that Latinos are very conservative when it comes to abortion, when they're very conservative when it comes to guns. We just came out of the field in 8 battleground states, the ones I mentioned: Arizona, Nevada, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. All of them, 68% of Latinos believe that choice is a private issue and that the government should not be involved. 81% believe in background checks. These are sensible measures. But what it demonstrates is that even among ruby red states, Latinos are close to 10 percentage points ahead of the rest of the population when it comes to these policy issues that we're combating right now. Now, if we start talking about climate change for young people, I don't have to convince them climate change is real. I have to convince them to vote, because it's taken such a long time for politicians to actually take that into action.
Right, and just a follow-up to this question, actually, Rafael has one for you, and so I'm going to let him take it away.
So we know that Latinos have not been approached, and you're talking about the quality of that approach, but it's also, speaking of tropes, it's also become a trope to say Latinos are not approached early and often. And I just want to ask you, who or what are setting up these barriers that prevent, especially Democrats, from reaching out in a quality way early and often?
I will share with you that usually the rule of thumb by political candidates is that they're only going to reach out to people that have a habit of voting at least 5 times. They're called high propensity voters. By default, Latinos get left till the very last minute. What I mean by that is that 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33. If you're disproportionately young and you may not have voted because you don't have the capacity to vote 5 elections in a row, the parties both leave them out. In 2020, according to NALEO, who is an incredible prestigious organization, they did a poll and found that 43%, Rafael, of Latino registered voters did not receive a contact from either party. That's malpractice. And so what the parties need to do is recognize that we're talking about the second largest group of Americans who swing elections. They are not just in California, but they are in the states that I mentioned that are deciding the map of our country. And so it's not a matter of using them as an afterthought, it's actively engaging them and being curious and meeting them where they are. And it's not enough to say that they believe in Taco Tuesday. It's much more important to say, show me the receipts. This is what we are actively doing for you.
Let me follow up on that really quickly and pick on you a little bit since we have you here. That research, we've been talking about this research, that NALEO research, you're right, it's a very good research. We've been talking about this for election cycle after election cycle.
Since I've been around, yes.
I believe you taught me about this, to be fair. So, we talk about this, and this is communicated up to the party. So what is it that's preventing, whether it's donors, whether it's party structures, whether it's, you name it, super PACs from following up on this research, and they just jump back to the likely voter model that clearly isn't doing the trick entirely?
Well, by following that older model of if folks have registered 5 times, you're actually leaving out disproportionately the millennial generation and Generation Z. Generation Z and the millennial generation, Rafael, are larger than the baby boomer generation combined. Larger. And we're talking to a tune of close to 18 million people that are young, they're trying to figure out and navigate the country, whether you're Latino, Black or white or Asian or Native American. And as a result, it tells us that the political system has to reimagine and be much more sophisticated in how do you embrace this new growing group of Americans. Because as I mentioned before, I don't have to convince a young person that climate change is real, but I do need to speak to their language, and I need to make sure that I can do some changes. And I think, and this is where this can get me a little bit in trouble, but I also think that they need to diversify the consulting class. It's not enough to have a junior Latino on your team when you are actually developing strategy. You need seasoned individuals who understand the community, being part of those executive teams, those managers, whether you're talking about a campaign manager, where you're talking about bringing in a consultant class to do so, because I will tell you, for us, Florida was not a surprise. We were flagging the issues with Florida and the disinformation to so many people back in March of 2019. I think you and I may have even talked about it. At Voto Latino, we were not surprised what was happening in Southern Texas in September of 2020. We were waving the flag, but it was more of business as usual. And so the challenges are really is like, who are the people around the table making those decisions? Who are advising donors of the world that we're living in and the challenges that we face? And I have to tell you right now, one of the things that Voto Latino is, addressing, along with great groups like Move On and Planned Parenthood, there's this sense of donor malaise saying, well, it's inevitable that the Democrats are going to lose an election. And what I remind folks is that you had great groups on the ground that were mobilizing individuals in 2018 and 2020. And those individuals know how to win. Double down on them and double down on those communities that brought you into elected office.
Well, Maria, we do have, people in the audience tuning in, and we have one who has a question for you. Melanie Mendez Gonzalez has sent in a question, and we're going to let her ask right now.
Hola, my name is Melanie Mendez Gonzalez, and I am the founder of the blog ¿Qué Means What? And my question for you is, what is your message to Latinas who want to get involved in their community, but just don't know where to start? Gracias.
First of all, it's wonderful to see you. I know that you've participated in many of our Power Summits, as well as Rafael, and that Power Summit, basically, we train young people how to participate in our democracy. And when people say, well, what can I do? There's a lot of things that you can do. But the first thing I'd encourage you to is to visit votolatino.org. And there you can become a poll worker. We train you on how to contact individuals and remind them on how their polling stations are. And it's all through text message. It's a really low lift. If you want to get more involved, then we actually send you off to concerts to watch really great musicians play while you're registering our Latino voters. But there's a lot of efforts. And if you want to do election protection, I encourage you also to reach out to NALEO. They have hotlines that is in partnership, I believe, with both Telemundo and Univision. And the whole idea is that if you have any problems at the polls, you contact them, and it's the 1-800 number. But there are a lot of ways to get involved. And just as importantly, if you're a voter, I encourage you to consider running for office. Oftentimes people say, well, I'm not ready. I don't know any man who's ever said that they're not ready. Throw your hat in the ring. And you can make transformational change at the local level. Our school boards are disproportionately, they do not recognize the Latino community in the classroom. If you consider making a monumental change in your community, in your children, or in your nephews or nieces' education, go and run for school board. It does a couple things. It helps address a local educational issue that we know impacts Latinos every single day. It teaches you how to run for office, and it also starts creating a bench so that you go from school board to city council, to state legislators, to Congress, to, I don't know, maybe the White House. But it's to think about that incrementally. And if you're a woman thinking of running for office, I'm an advisory on the advisory board of Poder PAC, and they help run women for office at all levels.
Maria, thank you so much. That was Maria Teresa Kumar, founding president and CEO of Voto Latino. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Be well. Thank you. And thanks for this conversation.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to Telemundo for all its support and to all of you attendees. And we do have to apologize to our audience for the technical difficulties with Representative Maliotakis. We would have loved to have her on, but we're sorry we couldn't make it work today. But we do look forward to having her back on a future program. For any of those of you who may have missed the conversations this afternoon, we will have video from the event up on the website shortly. And a big thank you to my co-host, Lex Juarez. Estás en tu casa.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be here. I loved, being able to help you facilitate these conversations.
Thank you for helping us lead these conversations. I'm Rafael Bernal. Have a good one.